Israel didn't hold a press conference to announce its security architecture was failing. No government official walked to a podium and said, "We can no longer guarantee your safety." They said it differently. They said it with school closures. They said it with bans on public gatherings. They said it by moving hospital patients underground. They said it by forcing 9 million citizens to reorganize daily life around sirens, shelters, and the constant calculation of whether the next 30 seconds will require a sprint to a reinforced room. And here's what that means for your portfolio. When a state built entirely on the promise of security begins speaking that language, the implications extend far beyond the Negev desert. They reach into the Strait of Hormuz, into the pricing models at Lloyd's of London, into the Federal Reserve's inflation projections, and directly into the value of every asset you're holding right now. Let me be direct about what we're analyzing today. This is not a story about whether Israel's military is weak. It isn't. The IDF remains one of the most lethal fighting forces on the planet. Iron Dome, David's Sling, Arrow 2, Arrow 3, these systems have intercepted thousands of projectiles over the past 18 months. The question isn't capability, the question is coverage. And more specifically, who bears the cost when coverage becomes incomplete? Because that's the shift happening right now. The Israeli state is transitioning from preventing civilian exposure to danger to managing civilian exposure to danger. That distinction sounds academic until you understand what it means in practice. It means the burden is moving downward, onto individuals, onto families, onto communities that now must calculate their own risk tolerance because the collective guarantee has narrowed. If you're finding this analysis useful, hit the like button now. We track the money, not just the missiles. That's what separates this channel from the evening news. Now let me show you why this pattern matters far beyond Israel's borders. Because this isn't new. This is how security architectures have always failed. Not in spectacular collapse, in quiet contraction. Rome didn't fall in 410 AD when Alaric sacked the city. Rome's security guarantee cracked in 378 AD at Adrianople, when Emperor Valens died and 2/3 of the Eastern Roman army was destroyed by Gothic cavalry. That battle proved the Danube frontier system, the network of legions, forts, and military colonies that had defined Roman civilization for centuries, was no longer filtering danger at the edge. From that point forward, security became improvised, local, uneven. The empire survived another century, but the psychological contract, the belief that Rome stood between ordinary life and chaos, that died at Adrianople. The structure outlived the promise. France learned the same lesson in May 1940. The Maginot Line wasn't just a defensive barrier, it was a national reassurance machine. $9 billion in today's dollars. Concrete fortifications stretching from Switzerland to Luxembourg. Artillery casements, underground railways, air-conditioned barracks. France believed it had converted the trauma of Verdun into permanent protection. Then Germany went through the Ardennes, not around the line, not through it, around the assumptions behind it. Within 6 weeks, 8 million French civilians were on the roads. The state that had promised protection was now issuing instructions. Move south, avoid main routes, prepare for occupation. The guarantee died before the nation surrendered. The United States hit the same wall in 1949. When the Soviet Union detonated its first atomic bomb, the American nuclear monopoly ended. By 1957, with Sputnik and the development of ICBMs, warning time had collapsed. America could still retaliate. It could still destroy the Soviet Union multiple times over, but it could no longer honestly promise to shield its own population from catastrophic attack. That's when the language changed. Duck and cover, fallout shelters, civil defense drills, continuity of government protocols. What did all of that represent? It represented the translation of strategic helplessness into household behavior. The most powerful nation on earth was telling its citizens, survival now depends partly on you. The burden moved downward. Now come back to Israel. Because Israel didn't build security as a secondary function of the state. Israel is a security state. That's the founding premise. Mandatory military service, reserve mobilization, intelligence dominance through Unit 8200 and Mossad, layered missile defense, hardened safe rooms in every home built after 1992. Sirens that can reach 97% of the population within seconds. This system wasn't designed to manage danger. It was designed to defeat danger, to maintain such overwhelming superiority that enemies would be deterred from attacking, and any attack that occurred would be intercepted, neutralized, absorbed without disrupting civilian life. That was the promise. October 7, 2023, shattered that promise. Not because Hamas won militarily. Hamas didn't win. But 200 Israelis died, 240 were taken hostage. The border surveillance system, considered the most advanced in the world, failed catastrophically, and the failure didn't stay confined to one day. It metastasized into a Gaza ground war that's now approaching 18 months, into Hezbollah rocket barrages from Lebanon, into Houthi missile launches from Yemen, into direct Iranian ballistic missile attacks, True Promise operations that have put Khaibar Sheikhan and Fatah 2 missiles into Israeli airspace. The system is now operating under sustained multi-front pressure, and the evidence is visible in civilian life. Here are the numbers. Israeli State Comptroller reports indicate that approximately 2.5 million Israeli citizens, roughly 1/4 of the population, lack access to standard protective infrastructure. In the southern and northern border communities, shelter coverage is below 60%. Public shelters have been found unfit for use in multiple municipalities. Coverage is unequal. Poorer communities, peripheral towns, Arab Israeli villages, these populations are structurally more exposed. When the sirens sound, some families reach reinforced rooms in 15 seconds. Others have 90 seconds to reach a public shelter that may or may not be unlocked, maintained, or structurally adequate. That's not a military problem. That's a political problem, a social problem, a question of who the state actually protects and who it asks to improvise. To understand the full economic implications of what I'm describing, the second war for energy dominance that's unfolding behind these military operations, you need to read the book linked in the description below. It's the playbook for what the 2026 economy is going to look like. Now let's talk money, because the financial implications of this security contraction extend directly into your portfolio. Start with energy. 20 million barrels of oil pass through the Strait of Hormuz every day. That's roughly 20% of global petroleum consumption. Iran has demonstrated the capability to strike Israeli territory with ballistic missiles. Israel has demonstrated the capability to strike Iranian nuclear facilities. If this escalation continues, and the trajectory suggests it will, the probability of direct conflict affecting Hormuz transit increases. Current Brent crude pricing assumes contained regional conflict, $75-85 per barrel. A Hormuz disruption scenario puts that number at $120 or $150 per barrel within 72 hours. What does $130 oil mean for the US economy? It means headline inflation returns to 5 to 6%. It means the Federal Reserve's rate cut path evaporates. It means the soft landing narrative that's been propping up equity valuations since late 2023 becomes untenable. Second, insurance and reinsurance markets. Lloyd's of London has already adjusted war risk premiums for vessels transiting the Red Sea by 400% since the Houthi campaign began. Shipping costs from Asia to Europe have increased by $2,000–$4,000 per container. That's embedded in every consumer product price you see. If conflict expands to direct Iran-Israel military exchange, those premiums don't just increase. Certain routes become uninsurable, and uninsurable means unusable. Third, the defense sector rotation. Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, General Dynamics, these stocks have already moved. But the second-order play is missile defense components. Iron Dome interceptors cost $50,000, $100,000 each. Israel has fired thousands. Arrow 3 interceptors run $2 to $3 million per unit. The US has committed $14.5 billion in military aid to Israel since October 2023. That money flows to American defense contractors. If you're not positioned in this sector, you're ignoring the most obvious capital allocation signal of the current cycle. Fourth, the safe haven trade. Gold has broken $2,400 per ounce. Bitcoin is being positioned by some institutional investors as a geopolitical hedge. US Treasury demand remains strong despite fiscal concerns. The question for individual investors is simple. Are you hedged or are you exposed? Because the scenario I'm describing, sustained multi-front conflict in the Middle East, energy price shocks, inflation resurgence, rate path uncertainty, that scenario doesn't require war to materialize. It only requires the probability of war to remain elevated. And right now, that probability is priced too low. Let me bring this back to the core thesis. What we're watching in Israel is not a military collapse. It's a credibility compression. The state remains formidable in retaliation. It can strike Iranian nuclear facilities. It can destroy Hezbollah's command structure. It can level Gaza. But it's becoming less convincing in protection. And that gap, between offensive capability and defensive coverage. That's where the political crisis emerges, because people don't measure security in doctrine. They measure it in whether there's a shelter close enough, whether the warning comes early enough, whether their kids can go to school, whether the hospital is above ground. The pattern is always the same. First, a state builds a security system so advanced that people stop seeing it as policy and start seeing it as permanence. Then that system expands. More fronts, more threats, more commitments, more dependence on constant readiness. Then reality adapts, enemies change tactics, warning time shrinks. The crisis doesn't destroy the system in one moment, it exposes the limits that were already there, and then comes the final stage. The burden moves downward. Citizens are told to shelter, relocate, avoid crowds, prepare supplies, harden their homes, absorb the stress personally. At that point, the truth has already arrived. The machine remains, the military remains. But the original promise has narrowed, and once that happens, the most important thing to watch is no longer the missiles, it's the language. Because states never announce failure directly, they announce it administratively. The threat environment has changed. Resilience is essential. Preparedness saves lives. Remain near protected spaces. That sounds technical, responsible, temporary, but hidden inside those instructions is a deeper confession. The state is no longer fully preventing civilian exposure to danger. It's managing civilian exposure to danger, and here's what that means for every modern state, including the United States. If you build legitimacy on protection, you must deliver protection, not retaliation, not deterrence, protection. The moment ordinary people begin adjusting their lives faster than the official narrative adjusts its language, the truth has escaped, not in speeches, in behavior, in the way families sleep, in the way children study, in the way hospitals operate, in the way neighborhoods experience risk differently, in the way the public stops asking whether danger exists and starts asking who is actually expected to absorb it. That's when a security story becomes a social story. And once that happens, the crisis is no longer about the next attack. It's about whether the state can still make its founding promise feel real. Because once people believe the burden has been shifted onto them, once they feel that survival depends more on personal adaptation than collective protection, something foundational has changed. And those changes are very hard to reverse. The guarantee is shrinking. Subscribe to see what takes its place. Are you holding gold, betting on the Fed, or positioned in defense? Tell me in the comments below. The most dangerous mistake right now is not panic, it's denial. Denial says the system is too advanced to fail. Denial says the technology will compensate. Denial says the next interception proves everything is still under control. But history says something different. History says the real turning point comes when ordinary people begin adjusting their lives faster than official narratives adjust their language. The shield remains, the pressure rises, the language shifts, the burden moves downward, and the state reveals, without ever fully admitting it, that the promise which once defined it is no longer as large as it used to be. That's the message hidden inside the instructions. That's the meaning behind the closures, the alerts, the shelter warnings, and the underground hospitals. And that's why this story is bigger than Israel. Because every modern state that builds legitimacy on protection should hear the same warning. The most dangerous moment is not when the machine disappears, it's when the machine survives, but the guarantee inside it starts to shrink.